Hey everyone, welcome back. Aversyle here with the fourth video in the scripting series. Today's episode, I decided we're going to talk about functions. In previous episodes, you might have heard me mention functions a couple times, but today we're going to formally talk about functions. And I'm going to try to explain everything I can when it comes to functions. So it might be a lengthy video, I predict. So get ready. Um, if you have to come back another day and watch this video, because functions are extremely important. But functions can get pretty complicated because functions allow you to organize your code in different ways. But I'm not gonna keep babbling. I'm gonna show you what functions are. But first, of course, you already know I gotta start with the recap. So last episode, we talked about properties and that we can actually change the properties of parts. And we can do this by understanding the relationship between all of the services here and a global variable known as game. And game is what we use when we want to access any of the services in this Explorer tab. And of course, anything within those services, including part, which is right here. So we talked about a special keyword called game, and we use game to be able to change the properties of, say, these parts. A part that I might insert into the workspace at some particular time. So I can go right click, insert object, go to script, and then we can either define a variable for this part in the workspace, or we can just type it all out in one line. So I could do game dot workspace dot part, sorry. And let's say I want to change the transparency of this part. So you name the property name, and then you set it equals, and then you set it to the value you want to set it equal to. So maybe I want to do 0.5. And that should make it see-through, but not completely invisible. So if we click run, we'll see, here it is. Look. So if I click on the part, you can see its properties in real time, and you see that it's 0.5. So that's pretty cool. And then when you stop the game, now it's 0 again. So you can change properties by using this special game variable. It's called a Roblox global. Basically, this was made by Roblox, and they've allowed us some special features with this, not just that we can access the services in the Explorer tab, but some other interesting things that we will talk about at a later time. So game is very special, but just understand that you have to use it if you want to reference anything else in this Explorer tab, like the workspace, for instance. So in essence, that's basically what we talked about. And then of course I said, well, we can also do a variable. So let's say I did local my part equals game dot workspace dot part, and then we can just use that variable to change any property we want. So I could say part my part dot brick color equals brick color dot new using this special syntax, and then we can change it to, let's say, I don't know, cadet blue, let's say. And then we just run the game, and we'll see that the color changed, and now it's cadet blue. And then, of course, when we stop the game, it goes back to medium stone gray. Oh, and then, of course, I talked about booleans. So if you have any property with a check mark here, the way that you change it is, well, there's two states, true and false, on and off. So this is off, this is on. On is true, so checked equals true. Unchecked equals false. So let's say I want to change the anchored property, which means that it is influenced by physics, or let's just say gravity for now. So you know that objects fall, so when anchor is disabled, if we run the game, forces apply, and it falls. But we can actually change that in our script. So we could say my part dot anchored, and we can see that it's a boolean, so it says whatever it's equal to is either going to be true or false. Well, right now it's false because it falls. So if we set it to true in our script and we run, it's not going to fall. You can see here. There we go. Let's go. So then we talked about booleans, we talked about So if, let's say you want to change the transparency, I talked about use the number data type because these are defined using numbers, just stuff like that. We went over some basic properties, and I said there was going to be some that I'm going to talk about at a later time because they do require quite a bit of scripting knowledge. So that's pretty much the properties we're going to talk about for now. But I just want to introduce you to this idea that we can actually specify parts or things in our game, and we can change various properties and do various things with those things. So I just want to introduce you to that idea, get that flowing in your head. And that about covers up last video. So now we're going to talk about functions. So get ready, it's going to be a little bit of a long one. I got a lot to talk about. So the main topics we're going to be talking about are functions. We're going to talk about scope. We're going to talk about arguments. Those are the four main concepts we're going to discuss today, and each one is going to take a considerable amount of time. So this might take you a while to sit through, but trust me, once you get this done, you're going to understand everything that you need to know for now about functions, and functions are going to make a lot more sense to you if you just bear with it, okay? I know my videos can be pretty long sometimes, but I want to make sure that you guys get every piece of detail that you can. I don't want you guys to be confused. I know how that feels sometimes to be just left in the dark because you don't really understand certain things. You know, there's gaps in your knowledge. I don't want to do that to you guys. So let's go ahead and delete this part. Control X if you don't know how to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and just delete whatever's in the script here. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to discuss the syntax for a function. So the first thing that you write down is local. Then you specify that you're talking about the function data type. So to specify that it's a function, we have to write the word function. Then we name the function. So I can call it my function or something like that. I could say print something. So let's say I want to print something in this function. Then we're going to do open closing parentheses. Then we're going to go over and we're going to click enter. So it should look like this, and you'll see that it automatically indents inside the function, and you'll also see this little end thing. This means this is where the function ends. So anything outside of that, or anything below that end, or anything above this line defining the function is not going to be the function itself. It's going to be outside of the function. But anything within these two things here, so end and local function print something, is the function. So what is a function? Well, I already said that a function is a data type, and the purpose of a function is to run a specified amount of code when you call the function. So what is calling? Well, it's basically like getting it to run. That's essentially what calling is. It's just getting the function to run. So basically this function will not run unless I call it. And to call it, you simply write the name of the function. I'm going to type this out, so print something. You'll see it pop up immediately. And then we're missing the open closing parentheses. That means, okay, this is a function. This isn't just a variable. Because if we erase that, we're going to assume this is a variable. It's not a variable, it's a function. And this is the special syntax you have to use to define a function. So when we write out the name like this, the name of the function, this is going to run whatever is in here. What? Nothing's in here. So nothing is going to run. So we need this function to do something. So let's define what we want the function to do. Well, I named it print something. So let's print something. Let's do print, and then let's say, hello, I'm Bob. Return of Bob. So we run, and look what happens. Hello, I'm Bob. But if we stop here, if we go back to the script and we get rid of this call, so without calling the name of the function, basically that makes it execute or it makes it run. If we erase that and then we run, you'll see that nothing actually prints because we didn't call the function. So that's why functions can be pretty useful. They help organize your code and make things only run when you really need them to run. Because maybe you don't always want this to be running. Maybe you only want it to run at certain times, and we'll get into applications when you're ready. but I just want to introduce the concept of a function. It's just a block of code that only runs when you call it. And to call it, you basically just use its name and then open closing parentheses to define that it's a function. That's basically what it is. That's all it is. So now I want to talk about something which can be a little confusing at first. Even for me, this was one of the things that when I started coding, I struggled to understand. But I want to talk about something called a parameter. A parameter is basically a placeholder that you can use in your function that can be resubstituted when you call it. So let me give you an example. So let's call this function add numbers. And let's say I have two numbers, x and y. Let's define a variable called sum equals x plus y. Then I'm going to return sum. Okay, well, let's go ahead and add numbers 2, 3. But then let's print it out. Let's print it out. Once again, I do not expect you to understand any of this right now. That is not the point. So 2, 3. Let's see what result we get. We got 5. How do you get 5 by adding 2 and 3? Well, you add 2 and 3. Where does that show up in this function? X plus y. So now I need to explain. All right, you notice how you have two parameters. So this is a parameter. This is what's called a parameter. An argument, so now that you have a better idea of how a function works, I want to redefine what an argument and a parameter is. So a parameter is basically a placeholder variable of sorts that you use in your function and you return it to be manually inputted by you. So this return word used to confuse me a lot, but I'm going to try to clear that up as best as I can for you guys, okay? I'm going to give you guys like a kind of an idea of how to look at it. So x and y are two parameters, and we use it in this sum variable. An argument is basically the values that you set your parameters to equal when you call the function. So that's why when you print, like let's say you print 2 and hello Bob. Those are your arguments because the parameters, well, they're already preset by Roblox because it's a function that was created by Roblox. You didn't make the function, Roblox did. So all you have to do is insert the arguments or just the values that you want the parameters to equal. But Roblox takes care of that. But if it comes to actual regular functions, we have to define everything, including the parameters. So the parameters are the placeholders for your arguments. That's what they are. X and Y are basically placeholders that we're going to use in our function, and then when we call the function, X and Y are going to turn into whatever arguments you pass through when you call it. And what's going to happen to your parameters depends on what you define them as in your function. So what we did here is we added x and y together, and then we returned the sum. So first of all, ignore return. We know that the thing that we want to do with x and y is to add them together. So remember when I put 2 and 3 as my argument, I got 5. So it worked. 2 plus 3 is 5. But why can't we just erase return? Why can't we just do that? That makes way more sense. Define a variable and set it equal to x plus y. And also you might be wondering, why do we print add numbers 2, 3? Well, the reason is because if we just call the function as it is, like let me do return again. So return sum. Let's just do add numbers 2, 3. Let's run. Do we get 5 in the output? No. Why? Because the function isn't just going to put it in the output. You have to remember how I said you have to print to put something in the output. Calling a function does not mean it's just going to go in the output. You still have to print whatever add numbers is going to give you. So as I was saying, let's get rid of return sum. Let's go ahead and run. Let's see if it works. It didn't work. Why didn't it work? Well, let me explain. Now you might be wondering, why can't I just do this? Why can't I just define the variable sum equals x plus y? Because you're not doing anything with the variable, you're just defining the variable. Remember, add numbers 2, 3, there's no connection with sum to any of these. So how do you make that connection? Well, you say return sum. And what that does is it sets the value of the function equal to whatever you put next to return. And remember, this is just a variable. So really, we don't even need to write this variable. We can just say return x plus y. Remember? Remember the rules I said about variables. Whatever the name is, it's equal to whatever's on the right. So we could literally just say return x plus y, and it'd do the same thing. So we have our parameters. We want to use those parameters, and we want the function to be equal to whatever we do with those parameters, which is x and y. So let's say I want to set the function equal to, I want the function to return x plus y to me when I call it. Okay, so I called the function, and I use the arguments 2 and 3. So the game goes, okay, so he has two arguments, 2 and 3. Let's go to the function. Okay, so we have two parameters here, so he just replaced x and y with 2 and 3. But what do you want me to do with it? Okay, so it wants me to give him this here. Okay, so here's what they want me to do with the function. They want me to return whatever x plus y is. So I want you to imagine it like this. Okay, computer reads, okay, here's a function here. All right, let's go over it. Okay, I got the function. Okay, it wants me to call this function here. Okay, let's go back to this function. Okay, we have x and y as parameters. We can see that they replaced it with that. Oh, okay, let's see. So what do they want me to do with the function? They want me to return x plus y. So what's x plus y? Well, we have two parameters here, and they said they wanted 2 and 3 to be replaced here. If they want me to if they want me to return x plus y, and x and y are 2 and 3, then this is what I'm going to print out, x plus y. So when you print it out, you're going to get x plus y, whatever x plus y is, and whatever you put for the arguments, which is 5. 2, 3, return x plus y. So x would be 2, right? So you define x here. Y would be 3. And the function only knows what to do with this call only if you use this special word return, and then whatever you want done with these two parameters. So I know that can be confusing because the syntax can be a little overwhelming when it comes to functions. So I want to do another function with you guys because I know this can be really tough to really get this return. I don't know if I explained it well enough, but we're going to define another function. We're going to call it local function multiply numbers. We're going to call it, so you can probably see what I want to do. And this time let's do A and B. So when I call this function, what do I want? Well, I want whatever A times B is equal to and whatever I set the arguments to equal. Like for instance, I'll show you. So let's just call the function, and I want to be able to substitute A and B, and it's going to multiply those together. So let's say I want to multiply 5 and 4 together. Well, 5 times 4 is 20, but how do I do that? Well, when we call the function, I want the function to return whatever A times B is equal to, or A times B. You can write it this way too. A times B. So when I call the function, I've replaced A and B with my arguments, and when I call it, I want to return whatever A times B is equal to. So if we run, we should get 20. Let's run it, and we did not print. Yeah, sometimes see, like sometimes even I can make mistakes, guys. So you gotta print it. The reason you have to print it is because just calling the function does not put it in the output. It's not just going to put it in the output just because you called the function. The script is still running the function, but you just can't see it because the only way to see stuff happening is because you have to print. That's why I told you print is super important if you want to see what's going on in your scripts. So this worked, it's just that I didn't print. So if we run, it's actually going to give us 20. There we go. So if I set, let's say, if I set this equal to 6 and, or let's say 7 and 7. Well, if you know your times tables, you'll know that it's 49. So we're going to get 49 is 7 times 7. So we define our function. We give the function a name. We define its parameters, which means the placeholders that we want to do something with inside of the function. We end the function, and then later on we call the function and replace its parameters with our arguments. And the only reason that the function knows what to do with our arguments is because we returned whatever we want these placeholders to do, which in this case is to multiply them together. So think of return as saying, okay, function, I want you to do this, right? And whatever goes beside return, this is what I want you to do. That's going to be your goal. So when I call it, it's going to do this, right? That's what it's going to do with these two parameters, these two placeholders. So I know return can be a weird word. It can be weird to understand, but the best way I can think about it is that we should start at the bottom and work our way up. So we called the function. So the function says, okay, we were called. Okay, so what do you want to do? Okay, well, let's give you a times b. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you a times b, which is our parameters, and our arguments just replace the parameters. But the function itself, what the function does, is whatever we're returning in this case. So I hope that makes sense. I'm going to try my best to recap next episode because I know return didn't stick with me. It took me a bit to fully just remember and understand exactly what's going on. But it's just special syntax that means I want the function to do this specific thing when I call it and give arguments. Like for instance, let me make it less complicated. Let's say local function print something. Let's go back to this. And let's say I want to print my name is Bob. All right. I'm probably never going to stop using Bob as an example, but so then we can just say print something, right? That's what we do. That's what we did last time. We print, and there we go. My name is Bob. But another way we can do that, instead of putting the print in the function, we can actually return my name is Bob. So what do you think that does? So we haven't called the function, but let's print the function. So print something, print something. Let's print it. Let's see what happens. My name is Bob. It printed. So basically, the function was equal to whatever this string was. Because remember, like variables, for instance. Let's say local text equals hello, and I print hello or text, right? It's the same concept. Hello is basically text. And then likewise, when we printed and we got my name is Bob, that's because print something as a function was equal to this. So I hope that makes a little sense. So you can see in this case, we can literally just substitute print something with my name is Bob because that's what we got. That's what printed out. So when we called print something, the function said, okay, let's see here. So it's telling us to give us whatever this is back when we call it. And so likewise, when I do local function add numbers, and let's do a and b, and we do return a plus b, and then we print add numbers, and then we pass our arguments, so let's say 5 and 5. So that's going to do 5 plus 5. This is basically saying when I call the function, what I want to happen is basically whatever thing we're returning. Now, I don't quite want to say the function is essentially equal to whatever we're returning. That's not really a good way to put it, but if you have no other way of understanding it, that's fine if you want to think of it that way for now. It's not really bad if you think of it that way. Like, I'm just going to set the function equal to that. But I think you're kind of missing the point a little bit. So I call the function. Okay, let's look at what the function is. Okay, so it says we want to return a plus b. So whatever we put in our arguments, we're going to return whatever this thing is, whatever we put here. And so it says, okay, let's give them a plus b. So we spit it out. We get 5. We insert 5 and 5 into whatever we're returning, and then we get our value, which is 10. So we run this, and we get 10. Boom. So that's kind of the best explanation I can give you of return. Once again, the intuition comes with repetition for this kind of thing. It's just awkward syntax. It makes sense when you understand how your script flows of sorts. So if you don't fully understand this, that's completely fine. You don't have to. This stuff takes time. I didn't instantly understand this. I actually struggled to understand return and actually shied away from it. But return is super important, guys. Okay, so do some math problems, practice using return. And once again, we can also define it in a variable. So we could say local sum equals a plus b, and then we could do return sum, right? It's the same thing. So we call the function, we have our arguments. All right, so they called it. Okay, let's see what we want the function to do. So we want to define this variable. Okay, so we're saying a plus b, and we want the call to return to us whatever we put here. So when we call it, we want to return whatever this is to this print thing. And what we get is the sum. So we're going to print whatever the sum is, basically. Now, there are a lot of different uses for return, but what I all basically want you to understand about return is that it basically spits out whatever you put as the return when you call the function. So remember that text we did? So let's say I wanted to return Bob, and then I print this, and there's no parameters now because we're just printing a string. And forget that it's called add numbers, and then we print, and it's just going to return Bob, which means for add numbers, when we call that function, it's just going to return Bob to us. That's all it's going to do. It's going to give us that. And when we run, we get Bob, right? So that's pretty much all I'm going to talk about for Bob. Now we're going to turn direction a little bit. We're going to talk about scope. So this is where you're going to understand why we use local and why local is best practice, unless you know what you're doing. So let's say I had a function, local function, my function, and whatever's in here. So let's say local number equals 5. And you remember how you can redefine variables? Let's go ahead and try to do that. So number equals number plus 5. Now, the problem with this is not the same thing as local number equals 5. This is not the same thing as that. Why not? Because this variable is restricted to this function. That's what local means, right? So let's try printing number. Let's try printing number. Okay, sorry, I messed up. First you have to call the function for this to exist. Okay, remember that. All this code does nothing unless you call the function first. So call the function and this variable will exist. But let's do local, number equals 5, okay? My function, so we call the function, so now local number equals 5 should exist, right? Well, let's print number. Let's see if it works. We get nil. Okay, well now let's get rid of local. Let's get rid of that. What happens? We get 5. So what's going on here? Why are we getting 5? Well, that's correct. Number is equal to 5, but why doesn't it work when we use local? Well, number is now what's called a global variable. So there are two types of variables I want to talk about, a global variable and a local variable. A local variable is restricted to whatever block that you're in. So this block is called a function, and it's a block. So if you have this arrow thing here, whatever's in here is the block of code. So this block of code is restricted to the thing that it's in, which in this case is a function. So number equals 5. See, look, it says global number is never read before being written. It's basically saying you should probably put local because you don't want to mix up other variables. Let's break it down. We define a function called myFunction. We define a variable. Let's go back to local here. So we define a variable called local. We called it number and it equaled 5. We then called the function and now we want to print number. We want to print whatever this is. But we can't. It equals nil when we tried. And that's because it's local, which means it's restricted to the block of code that it's in. If we take away local, now as long as we call the function, this variable will be accessible anywhere in your script, as long as it's below the function, because otherwise the function wouldn't exist. So like if I did print number up here, well, remember how it goes top to bottom? It goes up to down, up, down. So print number, this function wouldn't even exist as you printed that. So remember, it has to be below it. Remember that, okay? So as long as we call this function, number is going to exist, and that means it's a global variable, and we can call it anywhere. And the reason we don't do that is because it's bad practice, because you could confuse other variables that you write outside of the function with the one that is in the function. That's why we usually write local before we define a variable. So local basically restricts a variable to the block of code that it's in. That's what it does. And I can show you something cool. So let's say we have local number equals 5, and we could just, return number, and then we could just do return, and then we could print my function. And it's going to return 5, right? There we go, 5. Now, I think I want to clear up some confusion here. So basically, when we do this, we can't just access this variable unless it was global, right? So the only way to access what's done with variables in a function, generally speaking, is to return. So I will return number, which means when we call the function, we're going to return whatever we put beside the return. And so when we call the function, it's going to say, okay, well, we define a variable, and we want this call to be set to whatever we return, which is number. So when we print my function, it's essentially my function is the same thing as number. That doesn't mean that the function itself is equal to number when we return number. It means that when we call the function, the call is going to give you whatever you return. So if we have, let's say, two parameters, a and b, which are just substitutions, and we can call them right here. So this is a and b again, except now we're not doing substitutes, we're doing actual numbers. So let's say 5 and 10, and let's just return. Well, when we call this function, we want to replace a and b with 5 and 10, but whatever we return is actually what happens to a and b when we call the function. So we know what a and b are, but we don't know what we're going to do with a and b when we call the function. So what we return is whatever is what's going to happen when we call the function. So these arguments are basically the info that the function is going to use to execute whatever's in this function. So we're going to return, well, what do we want to happen to 5 and 10? Well, let's divide them. So what is 5 over 10? 5 over 10 is 1/2, which is 0.5. So it should return 0.5. There it is, 0.5. So why do we do local function? Well, this might get a little complicated. But let's go ahead and just define a local function. And let's call it stuff1. Then let's put another function, but we're not going to do local this time. Function stuff2. Then we're going to print, hello, my name is Bob. Okay, yeah. So let's try calling stuff1. Well, what will happen when we execute this function? Well, we have a function inside of the function, but this function isn't going to run unless you run it. The function that's in here, remember how you have to call a function for it to run? Well, nowhere are we calling stuff2. We're calling stuff1. So let's set this equal to local. Local function, stuff2, blah, 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 blah. So remember how that global variable that we defined, we just first had to define the first function, then we had access to that global variable that we defined. But this is local, so let's try executing stuff2, and let's see what happens. Oh, attempt to call a nil value, which means whatever we said here is nothing. It's equal to nothing. It's not defined. But let's go ahead and get rid of local and see what happens. Let's print. Let's run, sorry. Wouldn't you know it? It prints, hello, my name is Bob, which means the function ran. It's because it's called a global function. So I don't think I talked about this, but what did I mean by local versus global variable? A global variable is a variable that can be defined, and then you can use it from anywhere in your script. A local variable is a variable that can only be used in the block of code that it's in. That's why when we did local function, it can only be used in this block of code that it's in, which is this function stuff1. And see how it's highlighted red again? It's unknown. But if we delete local, all of a sudden, it's defined because it's global. So you might ask, okay, well, how do we use this function while having it local? Well, if it's local, if you're smart, you might think, well, how the heck are we supposed to print if we don't set it to a global? It's simple. Remember how I talked about returning? If you return stuff2, and then you call stuff1, when you call stuff1, you're going to return stuff2. So basically, it's going to call stuff2 when you call stuff1. Because remember, whatever you return is whatever stuff1 is going to give you when you call stuff1. And in this case, we returned stuff2. So when we call stuff1, whatever we're returning is what we're going to get when we call stuff1 anyways. So what do you think is going to happen when we run? Well, let's see. Boom. Hello, my name is Bob. So we didn't have to use a global function. We just had to return. That's why returning is so useful. And I recommend you use this because then you can use your local variables and your local functions and whatever, and just use return instead of having to find a bunch of global variables and risk confusing yourself. It just makes things so complicated. And I know the syntax is a little overwhelming because the past 3 episodes have been relatively easy, but this is just definitely a lot different. And so I am definitely going to be doing an in-depth review or recap, sorry, in the next episode, okay? Because I know this stuff can be a little confusing. And in fact, because I know this episode has been quite a bit harder, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a quiz in the comments Okay, so go look in the comments and reply to my comment and give me all your answers. And just put the number for the question that you're answering at a time. I want to make sure you guys understand this, okay? This was one of the hardest things for me when I was learning to code. This is definitely one of the filtering episodes of sorts because a lot of people might stop for a bit when they see this because they're like, okay, this is too much. And I understand your frustration. I Functions are hard when you're first learning them. They really are. So what have we talked about? We talked about functions, returning, and scope. So when I talk about functions, I'm just talking about any function. When I talk about returning, I'm talking about this word return. When I talk about scope, I'm talking about the difference between local variables and global variables, or global functions, or whatever, local functions. Just local, right? When you see local or no local, if you see no local, it's a global, which means you can use this anywhere. You can call this anywhere as long as you first call the function. If you don't call the function, it doesn't matter. None of this code inside here will work because you have to call it for any of this stuff to exist in any way. We talked about functions, we talked about scope, and we talked about returning. I'm going to give you a quiz in the comments and I want you guys to reply and I want to see that you guys are understanding this, okay? You don't have to fully understand everything, be like, the wizard who has all the answers. I just want you to start thinking about it more, and of course I will help any of you out if you let me know, okay? If you need help understanding something. So that about wraps it up for this video. Quite a lengthy one as I predicted. Pretty tough episode. I know it. I know. Functions are tough at first. Take your time, do the quiz, mess around with functions a little bit. I'm gonna do a recap in the next episode. But until then, that about wraps it up for this one. So I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.